The coronavirus pandemic continues to challenge our nation, and the Senate is here working for the American people. Our committees have called in experts like Dr. Fauci and leaders like Chairman Powell to discuss the CARES Act and the path toward reopening. We're tracking the effects of the largest rescue package ever and are considering next steps, like strong legal protections so that doctors, small businesses, school teachers, and universities do not face a second epidemic of frivolous lawsuits. The Senate is also staying on top of other threats that predated COVID-19, the meddling of Putin's Russia, the brutal Chinese Communist Party, rogue states like Iran and North Korea, foreign terrorists such as ISIS. 2 weeks ago, we overwhelmingly confirmed an impressive leader for our National Counterintelligence and Security Center, whom Acting DNI Grinnell has announced will play a central role in briefing candidates and campaigns on foreign threats against our elections. Today, our colleagues on the Intelligence Committee, now led by Acting Chairman Rubio, will report out the President's nominee to be the next Director of National Intelligence. And last week, we reauthorized essential tools that our intelligence community needs to defend our homeland, track our enemies, and protect Americans. But we didn't stop there. Over the last several years, we've been painfully reminded that our nation and our liberties are not only threatened from without, the fabric of our country is also hurt when tools and capabilities that are meant to keep us safe are abused in ways that are, at best, reckless, sloppy, unaccountable, or worse, polluted by political bias. In 2016, the FBI embarked on a counterintelligence investigation against Donald Trump's campaign for the presidency. Federal law enforcement used taxpayer money to scrutinize a political campaign in the middle of a Democratic election. You would have thought such a radical step must have sprung from an airtight justification. Certainly, you would think the outgoing Obama administration should only have used the awesome power of the federal government to pry into their political rivals if they had a slam dunk basis for doing so. But that's not what they had. In one instance, the FBI got permission to surveil a Trump associate by telling half-truths, blurring evidence, and citing sketchy sources like a dossier of partisan opposition research that had been funded by the Hillary Clinton campaign and the DNC. Here's how even the New York Times explained the recent findings of the Justice Department's Inspector General. Here's what the New York Times said. The FBI had cherry-picked and misstated evidence about the Trump advisor when seeking permission to wiretap him. That, Madam President, was from the New York Times. So an American citizen's campaign for the American presidency was treated like a hostile foreign power by our own law enforcement, in part because the Democratic-led executive branch manipulated documents, hid contrary evidence, and made a DNC-funded dossier a launch pad for an investigation. The Inspector General counted 7 significant inaccuracies and omissions. Here's his report. We identified multiple instances in which factual assertions relied upon in the FBI's FISA application were inaccurate, incomplete, or unsupported by appropriate documentation based upon information the FBI had in its possession at the time the application was filed. Did you catch that last part? Based upon information the FBI had in its possession at the time the application was filed. So we're either talking about gross incompetence or intentional bias. Does any senator think it's acceptable for any federal warrant application to include 7 significant inaccuracies and omissions? But this wasn't just a run-of-the-mill warrant. It was a FISA warrant to snoop on a presidential campaign. This is just one of the realities that President Trump's Democratic critics spent years calling conspiracy theories or inventions of the president's mind. Yet here it is, in black and white, from exactly the kind of independent inspector general the Democrats rushed to embrace when convenient. Sadly, this was no isolated incident. Just recently, Attorney General Barr has had to take the incredible step of unwinding a DOJ prosecution of another former Trump advisor because the government's case against him was unfair and distorted as well. It was largely on the basis of these proceedings that Democrats and the media spent years fixating on wild theories of Russian collusion. But upon investigation, the Mueller investigation, remember that one? It is those wild allegations that collapsed, along with the credibility of several of these investigations that helped create the cloud of suspicion in the first place. In the words of our distinguished Attorney General, the proper investigative and prosecutorial standards of the Department of Justice were abused. We saw two different standards of justice emerge, one that applied to President Trump and his associates, and the other that applied to everybody else. We can't allow this to ever happen again. End quote. That's from the Attorney General. Oh, and by the way, as if this debacle needed even more shocking behavior, I understand a federal judge may try to continue prosecuting one of these cases even though the prosecution itself wants to drop it. The judge has taken it upon himself to go browsing for other hostile parties. Obviously, that subverts our constitutional order in which the executive alone decides whether to prosecute cases. So look, Madam President, no matter what some Washington Democrats may try to claim, you're not crazy or a conspiracy theorist if you see a pattern of institutional unfairness toward this president. You would have to be blind not to see one. You'd have to be blind not to see one. All of this is why the Senate passed important FISA reforms in last week's bill to help bring accountability and transparency into that flawed process. And we aren't nearly finished. As soon as possible, the full Senate will vote on Mr. Ratcliffe's nomination. The President will have a Senate-confirmed DNI who can pursue the vital national security work of our tireless intelligence community while also ensuring that the IC stays out of politics and out of the papers. And just yesterday, Chairman Graham announced the Judiciary Committee will vote on a serious new set of subpoenas so the Senate can hear directly from key players like James Comey, Andrew McCabe, Loretta Lynch, and many others to continue getting to the bottom of this. So let me say that again. Senate Republicans are taking steps to issue new subpoenas to a wide variety of Obama administration officials with some relationship to the abuses I've just laid out. The American people deserve answers about how such abuses could happen, and we intend to get those answers. So, Madam President, I've been a strong supporter of law enforcement and the intelligence community during my career. The American people sleep safer because dedicated people are protecting our country and bringing our foes to justice. It is precisely because I support these missions that I feel so strongly this malpractice cannot be tolerated and must never be repeated.